The chair scraped back so hard it echoed off the ceiling, and every head in the room turned. Dominic Reese had just set a 47-page architectural rendering on the conference table. He had not slammed it. He had placed it, carefully. The way you set something down when you are trying very hard not to throw it. Conrad Ashby looked at the pages, then looked at him, and smiled the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes because it was never meant to. Dominic, buddy. He said it the way you say it to someone you are about to pat on the head. These are lovely, they really are. But the Hargrove Commission isn't a community center. These clients spend $20 million on a vacation home. They don't want lovely, they want legacy. He picked up the top sheet and held it between two fingers like something wet. Who helped you with the renderings? The room had 12 people in it, partners, senior associates, 2 interns near the door who had made the mistake of arriving on time. Not one of them said anything. Not one of them looked at Dominic. They found things to examine on the table, their own hands, the window behind Conrad's shoulder. Dominic was 27. He had been at Ashby Merritt Design for 11 months. He had a degree from Howard University, which Conrad had mispronounced at the hiring interview and never corrected. He lived 40 minutes from the office by train and 38 minutes by bus, and he knew the difference because he had timed both on the day his car died in October and he had not replaced it since. He had drawn those 47 pages himself. At night, mostly, at a desk that doubled as a dining table in an apartment where the radiator made a sound like someone shaking loose change. He looked at Conrad Ashby and said, very quietly, "I drew them myself." Conrad set the page back down. He smoothed the corner with 2 fingers, the way you smooth something that is already smooth. "Right." He smiled again. "We'll have Weston take another look, give it his touch. These clients need someone who speaks their language, you understand?" Weston Park was 34. He had gone to Yale. He had never, in 11 months, spoken to Dominic about anything except to ask if the coffee was fresh. Dominic nodded once. He picked up his pages. He walked out. In the elevator, he did not say anything. There was no one to say anything to. He pressed the lobby button and watched the numbers go backward, and thought about the thing he had noticed on page 31 of the Hargrove site survey, the thing nobody else had caught, the thing that would matter. He thought about whether to say something. He had not decided yet when the doors opened. To understand what happened 3 weeks later, you need to understand what was on page 31. And to understand page 31, you need to understand Dominic. His mother, Renata, cleaned offices downtown. She had cleaned offices for 22 years, starting the year his father left and not stopping since. She worked the late shift, which meant she was gone by the time Dominic got home from school and back by the time he left in the morning, and for most of his childhood the evidence of her presence was a covered plate in the refrigerator, with his name on a piece of masking tape in her handwriting and a note that said either eat this or don't you dare skip this. When Dominic was 9, he built a model of their apartment building out of cardboard boxes and popsicle sticks, doors that opened, windows with wax paper panes, a roof that lifted off to show all the floors inside. His teacher entered it in the district science fair without telling him. It won first place in the city category for ages 12 and under. He was 9. When Dominic was 12, his middle school counselor told Renata in a meeting that Dominic should consider a vocational track. He was bright, the counselor said, good with his hands. Architecture was a field where connections mattered as much as talent. She meant it kindly. Renata thanked her. On the way home, Renata stopped at the public library on Grand Avenue and applied for Dominic's first library card. She also found a used copy of a book called The Elements of Architecture in a cart by the door and bought it for $1. Dominic read it in 4 days. He read it again. He copied drawings from it by hand onto printer paper, the only paper in the house, because sketchbooks cost money. When Dominic was 16, he won a citywide design competition for high school students. The prize was a 1-week summer program at a firm downtown. He was the only student there, without a parent who had made a call to get him in. When Dominic was 22, he graduated from Howard's architecture program, 3rd in his class. He applied to 7 firms. 4 did not respond. 1 asked him in for an interview and then called to say the position had been filled 2 hours before he arrived. 1 offered him a junior draftsman role at a salary he would later learn was 30% below what they had offered the white graduate they hired the same month. He took it. 11 months later, he was at Ashby Merritt. Now, about page 31. The The Hargrove Commission was a 6,400 square foot residence on a bluff in coastal Maine. The site had a 14-degree slope at the eastern end, which the survey marked in gray, and most people glanced past. Dominic had not glanced past it. He had looked at it for a long time and then gone back to the survey notes and found a single line buried in a footnote. Bedrock shelf begins approximately 4.2 meters below grade, eastern quadrant. That meant the eastern foundation couldn't go below 10 feet without hitting rock, which meant the glass pavilion Conrad wanted to cantilevered off the east face, a pavilion that was the visual centerpiece of the entire project. The thing Conrad had sketched on a napkin and called visionary was either going to cost the client an additional $400,000 to engineer around the rock, or it was going to shift. And if it shifted, the whole orientation of the house shifted. And if the orientation shifted, the view lines Conrad had sold to the Hargroves in January were not the view lines they were going to get. Dominic knew this in November. He had written it in the margin of his own copy of the survey in pencil. He had been deciding for 3 weeks whether to say something. Every time he tried, he calculated exactly how the room would hear it. A 27-year-old black man from Howard telling Conrad Ashby that the centerpiece of his napkin sketch didn't work. He knew what the room would do with that. He had seen what the room did with smaller things. So he had drawn an alternative instead. 47 pages. A redesign that accepted the rock shelf and used it. The pavilion moved west. The orientation shifted 12 degrees. The view lines were better. Not different. Better. The angle captured the full lighthouse silhouette to the northeast that the original plan had cut off. Conrad had dismissed it in 40 seconds. The Hargrove site visit was scheduled for the second Friday of December. Conrad was presenting. Weston had spent 10 days reworking Dominic's renderings, which now looked largely like Dominic's renderings, with different furniture in the rooms. Dominic was not on the attendance list. He found out the day before, when the calendar invite updated and his name was gone. He sat with that for a moment. Then he opened his laptop. He pulled up the survey. He looked at page 31 again. He sent one email, to Conrad only. Subject line, site note, eastern quadrant. 2 sentences. The bedrock shelf will affect the eastern foundation by a minimum of 4 feet. I documented this in November and can provide the structural note if needed. That was it. No CC. No attachment, no request to be added to the trip. He sent it at 7:48 in the morning, before anyone else was in the office. Conrad read it. He typed back 3 words, noted, thanks Dom, and closed his laptop. The site visit was a Friday. Dominic went to work. He did not think about Maine. At 2:17 p.m. his phone buzzed. It was an intern named Josie who was on the trip. The message said, Conrad is on the phone with someone. It's not good, eastern side. Something about rock. I don't know what's happening. Dominic looked at his phone for a long time. He put it face down. At 3:04 p.m., his desk phone rang. It was Marielle, Conrad's assistant, voice flat and professional. Mr. Ashby would like to bring you into the site call. Can you be available now? He said yes. The call had 8 people on it. Conrad, Weston, the structural engineer the firm used, a man named Prater who Dominic had never met, the Hargrove clients. Sumner Hargrove, 60-something, retired private equity, and his wife Beatrice, who said very little but whose silences, Dominic would later understand, were the ones that mattered, and a site contractor who had spent the morning driving stakes into frozen coastal ground and hitting rock at 9 feet on the eastern side. Conrad's voice on the call had the specific texture of a man managing damage, smooth on the surface, but if you knew what you were listening for, you could hear the seams. We anticipated some variation in the bedrock depth, Conrad said. Our team has been working through contingency approaches. What contingencies? Sumner Hargrove said, not angry, just waiting. Silence. The particular silence of a room where nobody wants to speak first. Prater, the engineer, cleared his throat. Weston said nothing. Dominic could hear the wind in the main audio. Someone on the site was walking. Conrad said, Dominic, you had some thoughts on this. Walk us through it. It was not a gracious handoff. It was the kind of thing you say to a person you need standing in front of a problem you created. Dominic understood that. He understood it completely. He also understood something else. The Hargroves were on the line. The contractor was on the line. The structural engineer was on the line. If he said something wrong, the problem got worse. If he said nothing, the project failed. He had 47 pages in a folder on his desktop. He opened the folder. "Mr. Hargrove," he said, "my name is Dominic Reese. I'm a designer on your project. In November, I flagged a note in the site survey indicating bedrock at approximately 4 meters on the eastern end. I prepared an alternative scheme that works with that constraint rather than against it. I can share it now if that's useful." A beat. Beatrice Hargrove said, "Please." He shared his screen. The 47 pages. The redesign that moved the pavilion west. The 12-degree orientation shift. The lighthouse view. He talked through it quietly and specifically, the way he had been doing things since he was 12 years old, copying drawings onto printer paper. He explained the bedrock logic. He explained the structural savings. He pulled up a sightline comparison, the original plan versus the revised one, both rendered at sunset, and on the right side of the screen, the lighthouse came fully into frame in a way it didn't on the left. He did not dramatize this. He just showed it. Sumner Hargrove said, "When did you draw this?" "November," Dominic said. "After the survey came in." Another beat. "Conrad." Sumner's voice had changed by 1 degree, just one, but it was enough. "Why are we seeing this now?" Conrad said something about internal review processes, about the team working through options. Dominic listened to this without commenting. He was looking at the sightline comparison still on his screen. The lighthouse on the right side, sharp and clear, the way it would actually look from the master bedroom at 6:40 in the evening in late October, when the light hit the water at that angle. He had drawn it at midnight in December, sitting at a table that was also a desk. He had checked the longitude and looked up the sun angle for coastal Maine in October because that was the kind of thing he did when he was working on something that mattered. Prater, the structural engineer, spoke up for the first time. "The revised scheme eliminates the deep foundation entirely. The savings would be substantial." He paused. "This is solid work." Beatrice Hargrove had been quiet for 4 minutes. She said, "We want the lighthouse in the view. That's what we came for. Can someone explain to me why that wasn't the plan from the beginning?" Conrad said something. It was not a useful answer. The call ended 40 minutes later. The Hargroves asked for a follow-up presentation from Dominic directly. Not from Conrad, not from Weston. From Dominic in person the following Thursday. Marielle called Dominic 2 minutes after the call ended and told him with a careful neutrality that Conrad would like to debrief. Dominic said he was available. He closed his 47 pages. He sat for a moment in his quiet office and looked at his screen. On it, the lighthouse stood in its correct place. The debrief was not long. Conrad sat behind his desk. He said the Hargroves had been impressed. He said the firm was going to move forward with the revised scheme. He said Dominic had done good work. Then he said, "In the future, when you have a concern about a project direction, I'd prefer you come to me directly rather than sitting on it." Dominic looked at him. He said, "I sent you an email at 7:48 yesterday morning." Conrad said, "Right, yes." He moved something on his desk, a pen, from one side to the other. "I mean earlier than that, when you first had the thought." Dominic said, "I raised it in November. Before the design review, I was told to let Weston handle the project." The pen stopped moving. There was a pause of exactly the kind that happens when someone has just said a true thing to a person who does not want the true thing on the record. Conrad looked at the pen. He looked at his desk. He looked at the middle distance that people look at when they are restructuring what they were about to say. "The firm values your contribution," Conrad said finally. "I want you to know that." Dominic nodded. He stood up. He thanked Conrad. He walked out. In the elevator, the doors closed, and he let out the breath he had been holding for the better part of 3 hours. His hands were steady. They had been steady the entire time. He had known they would be. His hands were always steady when the work was his and the work was right. The Thursday presentation was in a conference room at a hotel near the Hargroves' Boston address. Dominic arrived with a printed portfolio and 2 digital decks and a scale model he had built over the weekend at the desk that was also a table, working from 9 p.m. to 2 a.m. both nights. His mother had called Saturday afternoon, and he had told her about the project, and she had said, in the way she said things that were both question and answer, "Is it good work?" He said yes. She said, "Then go do it." The model sat in the center of the conference table. It showed the pavilion in its western position, the roof plane stepping down toward the water, the 12-degree orientation that opened the northeast view. The lighthouse, in the model, was a small white cylinder of foam board, but it was there, in the right place. Sumner Hargrove walked around the model twice without saying anything. His wife touched the roofline with one finger. The way you touch something you are trying to understand with your hands. For 90 minutes, Dominic answered every question they had. Structural, aesthetic, timeline, budget. He knew the answers because he had been thinking about this building since November. Not because someone had handed him a brief, but because it was the kind of problem that kept him up at night in the useful way problems do when you love what you are doing. At the end, Sumner said, "How long have you been at the firm?" 11 months. Sumner looked at his wife. She was looking at the model. She looked up and said to Dominic, "We'd like you to lead this project." The word lead. Dominic heard it. He understood what it cost. He also understood that it was not his to refuse on behalf of the Hargroves. It was what they wanted. He said he would be honored. He called his mother from the hotel lobby. She picked up on the second ring. He told her. She was quiet for a moment in the way she was quiet when she was processing something she had been waiting a long time to hear. "Baby," she said, "eat something." He laughed. He had not eaten since 7 a.m. What happened next took 3 days. Marielle sent a calendar invite for a project briefing. Dominic was listed as project lead. Conrad was listed as senior oversight, which was a title that had been invented for the occasion and did not previously exist at Ashby Merritt. Weston was not listed at all. A senior partner named Frances Okwu. Dominic had met her twice, both times in hallways. Both times she had looked at him like she was filing something. Stopped by his desk Tuesday morning, she put a coffee cup down next to his keyboard. She did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, "The Hargrove clients asked for you specifically, by name. I looked up your November note in the project file." Dominic said, "It was in the survey." She said, "I know where it was." She picked up her own coffee cup. "There's a conversation that needs to happen about how this firm handles its junior staff. That conversation is going to happen. It's going to take longer than it should. In the meantime, I want you to know I've read your November file. All of it." She left. Dominic sat at his desk and turned that over for a moment. Then he opened his laptop. He had a project to run. The Hargrove house was completed 19 months later. It sat on its bluff in the correct orientation, the pavilion facing west and north, the roof lines stepping toward the water, the way Dominic had drawn them at midnight in an apartment, with a radiator that sounded like loose change. On the northeast wall of the master bedroom, facing the lighthouse, there was a window that Dominic had dimensioned himself, 12 feet wide, 4 feet tall. At 6:40 p.m., in late October, the light came through it in a single plane and hit the back wall, and made the room look like the inside of something you'd want to stay in forever. The Hargroves sent a photo to the firm. Sumner and Beatrice standing in front of that window, the lighthouse visible behind them, clear and small and exactly where it was supposed to be. Dominic printed the photo. He kept it in the top drawer of his desk, not on the wall, not framed, just there, where he could look at it when he needed to remember what the thing was for. Renata came to the site once, before the interior was finished. She wore her good coat, the gray one she kept for important occasions, and she walked through the empty rooms while Dominic explained what each one would become. She didn't understand architecture the way he did. She understood her son. She had understood him since the cardboard model at age 9, since the library card, since the late nights. She stood at the rough opening of the northeast window, framing boards still visible, subfloor underfoot, and looked out at the water. She said, "You drew this?" He said, "All of it." She stood there a moment. She pressed her hand flat against the rough wood of the window frame. She didn't say anything after that. She didn't need to. Some work doesn't need a speech. It just needs to stand there and be what it is. Conrad Ashby left the firm 8 months after the Hargrove project completed. The circumstances were described internally as a mutual decision. Frances Okwu moved into a managing partner role. 2 of the junior designers who had been in the room for the November review asked Dominic separately, in the months that followed, if he remembered how quiet everyone had been when Conrad held that rendering between 2 fingers. He said yes. He remembered. He didn't say what he remembered thinking. Some things you carry quietly and they make you better at your work, and you don't need to explain them to anyone. Dominic was 30 when the Hargrove house appeared in a national architecture journal. The article called the Eastern Pavilion solution elegant and structurally precise. It mentioned the lighthouse view. It quoted Dominic once, "The site told you what to do. You just had to be willing to listen to it." He read the article at his kitchen table, which was also his desk. The radiator had been replaced by then. The new one was silent. He thought about the 47 pages, about November, about page 31. He thought about his mother driving home from an office building at 1 a.m., and about a cardboard model with windows that opened, and about a library card on Grand Avenue, and about all the things you carry in the quiet years before any room is ready to look at you and call you by the right name. The room always catches up eventually. It just costs something to wait.